Well, thank you, Jill, and this is a great opportunity, and I hope there'll be rich exchange that follows on from this panel. So this is the start of the conversation. First of all, I want to clarify that I work with an incredible team in the Center for Digital Health Innovation, so I'm one piece of the puzzle there, but this is a great opportunity for us to talk about a really exciting transformation in how we are empowering people around their own health, and we're also changing the model of healthcare delivery by really moving it out of traditional clinical settings when it's appropriate to do so. And to do that, we need certainly new roles, we need new models of all kinds, including reimbursement models, but we need cultural shifts, and we also need technologies, and that's what this session is about. So it's exciting for me to be able to bring together an opportunity to conversation with this multi-sector panel who bring deep experience and passion and opinions. So it's going to be fun to kick this off. My perspectives are informed by my role early in life as a PT and doing home care in that role. Also, I'm now an orthopedist. I also was a family caregiver for 10 years for my father, and we continued to struggle to replace missing facilities or diminishing facilities with combinations of innovation in personnel, process, and technology in the home setting. And then as a caregiver and, a provider and a patient myself and an innovator. So each one of us on this panel comes from a multi-sector background. We know that health and healthcare are moving very rapidly out of strict traditional settings as we've known them in the US. And I think it's really an important time for us to look at what are the capacities that are right in front of us right now that might not be being leveraged, which ones are already in play that maybe we need to understand better the model for adoption and also understand better the effectiveness in care and cost around those technologies. And also look at, is there a cultural lag between the capacities that we have and an understanding of how we actually want them deployed in our lives? Sometimes technology outstrips societal consensus, regulation, and practice patterns. So I think we're at a real crossroads in many of those areas. And I think of digital health now being in its adolescence where it's just starting to be taken seriously. For some adolescents, it's already taken very seriously if you're the CEO of a startup like we saw earlier today. But we do think of moving further along with the technologies, these remote diagnostics, maybe being a little bit behind, maybe being in late childhood, but I think on a more rapid growth curve, so catching up. So these services of digital health and these technologies, they're coming out more and more in combined solutions, which I think is very important. And part of this is the forces that are upon us. The technologies that are available are changing this. The individual empowerment that we see now as a culture is changing this. Seismic shifts in healthcare delivery models and reimbursement models are also driving these changes. So I would like to now shift over to the panel, and as we're going through these conversations about capabilities, we want to keep asking the challenging aspects of barriers to adoption, lessons we've learned that didn't work already, but very importantly, the evidence question. How are we demonstrating care and effectiveness in care and cost? And there are certainly some leaders in this. Eric Topol's a good example with Steven Steinhubel in San Diego, but we need to do more and more evidence seeking around these interventions. And we also need to include now new users as we deliver diagnostics. It's not just the providers and the payers and the delivery system anymore, but a lot of these diagnostics are being placed in the hands of people. And we want to understand better what works for them with these technologies in their life flow. So I would like to now introduce the panel, and we have three distinguished speakers, Dr. David Albert. They're each going to introduce themselves as well, Mark Daoura and Randy Parker. And why don't we lead off right now by having David give us some insights as well as his introduction. Each panelist will speak for a couple of minutes, get some bullet points and some messages out there, and then we'll have a rich exchange of ideas.
Thank you, Aenor. I am David Albert. I'm the founder and chief medical officer of AliveCor, and you may have heard that word a couple of times earlier today. I guess I'm the old man of mobile health. I'm a 60-year-old physician engineer who came out of cardiovascular medicine, and this is my fourth company. Sold my last one to GE, And so I've been doing this for quite a while. And we have a smartphone connected electrocardiograph device. We sell it outside of the $3 trillion ball that is reimbursement-based medicine. We sell it both to physicians. We have thousands and thousands. Have about 10% of all US cardiologists have bought one. But we have many, many more, tens of thousands of patients who have bought them. And we were able to get FDA clearance for a device as an over-the-counter device. So it's become part of that patient empowerment. And it's kind of a little unique in that it's used by both physicians and by patients to generate ECG rhythm data. And so I look at it from both sides, provider and patient.
Great. Let's move on now. Randy, would you like to take off next?
Sure. Randy Parker, founder, CEO of MDLIVE. MDLIVE was started in 2009 with the position that we could take and build an ecosystem of a health system without walls, and what we would refer to as fewer bricks and more clicks. And the way that we wanted to do that, though, was to take technology and use it to connect health systems throughout the U.S. where consumers and patients have trust in their local providers. We would build an ecosystem that would allow them to have the ability to connect wherever they were. We can go anywhere in the country with our Ford automobiles and go into a dealership and have all the information about our vehicles. We thought we could do that for our consumers and patients. The one difference is that we would be able to do that at a level of service that didn't exist in healthcare. Healthcare set the bar kind of to the Department of Motor Vehicle, and we're building a system that creates an exceptional experience, something similar to Apple or Amazon.
Great, thank you. And Marco.
Yeah, thank you, Aenor. So my name is Marco Daoura, and I am not a CEO or a CMO yet. So I am Director of Product Management at FUJIFILM Sonosite. I've been in the healthcare industry for about 20 years. I'm very fortunate to be here on behalf of FUJIFILM Sonosite and the team who worked very diligently and passionately, I have to say, for launching very recently a connected medical visualization solution called IVIS. And I have to preface and paint a picture here a little bit about the passion that we have. It's sort of something that's in the Sonosite DNA, in the culture. It's passion not just to deliver solutions. It's passion in the belief that we can change the world. Doing that in different ways, by democratizing ultrasound, by bringing more access to ultrasound, by bringing ultrasound to the patient. In fact, that's something that Sonosite had kicked off since 15 years ago when it launched the point-of-care market and created it. So our belief is that every patient could be seen by an imaging device like an ultrasound, wherever they are, whenever they are, and to whomever is able to scan with the ultrasound and make a diagnosis. And we'll get back to that later. But our focus has been on always maintaining a high standard for image quality, high standard for patient information security, workflow, ease of use, ruggedness. And I have to say in the context of this conversation that our goal has been that this platform would become a medical hub for the physician. In the center, yes, it's a medical visualization solution that uses ultrasound to let you see through the body. But on the periphery, we want this to become a medical hub where other patient vital sensors can be included in the report so that at the end of the exam, the patient has one comprehensive report that includes seeing through the body and patient vital sensory information within that same report for making a very informed decision.
Thank you very much. So these are very exciting representations of the capacity to move diagnostics and therefore care outside the building of the traditional clinical setting. That brings up a tremendous capacity and potential, and it also brings up some risks and responsibilities. So I'm interested in asking the question now of what do you think we can do, and how do we look at being able to tell the story accurately of what these exciting devices can do and can't do. Because sometimes I think that's a challenge. We look at the ability to do ultrasound anywhere in the world, remotely, send messages, have it interpreted, et cetera. But it's challenging, it's complex to understand. It's actually very complex to acquire the study accurately, and as most people know, it's not a static image, it's a dynamic study that needs interpretation. So there are challenges around that. Same thing with the EKGs, the difference between 1 to 3 lead versus 12 lead, and the models of shifting care where you're really hands-on and in person to more telecare. I want to ask a challenging question to each of you of, how do you feel we can tell the story accurately? So it looks exciting, but not oversimplified. So we're maintaining the responsibility of giving the best data, because serious decisions will still be made on the data acquired by these remote diagnostics. Do you want to start with that, Dave?
I'll try. You know, one of the things that we look at that I think is very important, when we look at how a physician uses our device to evaluate cardiac rhythm, classic example is a cardiologist has a patient come in, they get a 12-lead ECG, they walk into the exam room, the physician walks in and says, well, you're in sinus rhythm, and the patient goes, yeah, but I feel funny right now. Hands them our device, and they say, well, now you're in atrial fibrillation, white coat effect, you know, got a little nervous. That kind of instant assessment. However, then we have somebody, our average customer as a patient is 61 years old, and 4% of our users are over 80. We really have to be simple. We really have to be intuitive. And that places more burdens, because while we try to give them peace of mind, you're stable, you're the same as you were yesterday or last week, we really want to get quality data to the caregiver. And so that's the, you know, we're serving two markets, and we tell them, this is not a 12-lead ECG. We're not going to diagnose an acute MI. Okay, we're looking at cardiac rhythm. Are you in AFib? Are you in bigeminy? Are you in sinus rhythm? And for, you know, for the 3+ million AFib patients, I think everyone here has probably seen, talk about consumers, the direct-to-TV ads for Xarelto or Eliquis for AFib not caused by heart valve abnormality. Well, those are our patients, and we're trying to give them peace of mind when TV says, oh, by the way, you're at a higher risk of a stroke. Yes, you are 5 times. So it is a challenge, but again, I think we're learning as we go. That, you know, we're all pioneers here. Digital medicine from 2009 to 2016, I hate to say it, but I think we're just barely out of that Wild West slide.
I would agree with that. I think one of the issues is the adoption, the change of behavior, both for the physician as well as the patient. And when you start to adopt new technologies like this that create just a complete change in behavior, it isn't how physicians were trained. It isn't what consumers are ultimately, although they're expecting this type of convenience, we have to be really careful about where convenience crosses over to quality, and we're addressing that now with over 12 million members, and where we first started in 2009, we couldn't get physicians to take virtual medicine as a serious part of their practice, another tool in their toolbox. Today, going into 2016, we're at a perfect storm perspective where technology has just caught up. I mean, we're talking about digital health for the longest period of time. Telemedicine started with the Apollo mission, but I agree, we're just coming out of the point where we have the technology, the bandwidth, and also the mindset of trained, whether they're med techs in our case, which we'll be using in virtual clinics, taking out nurse practitioners and replacing them with med techs who really understand how to use the technology, transmitting remotely to physicians on the other side that can have both the trust that the actual data that's coming across is valid. Mm-hmm. That's why you see multiple testing going on. He's a physician and he sees a test from another physician and he says, well, I don't really trust that. I want to run my own test. This is a real change that we're going to have to put in, and also make sure that we're managing the right processes around it. It could either be a very good thing or a very bad thing, depending on how it's used.
I think these are really good points. Mark, would you want to add on to that?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, with regards to ultrasound, let's talk about the elephant in the room. We do not want to pretend that anyone can just pick up an ultrasound system, use it to get the right images, and to make a diagnosis. That's not what we're saying. At Sonosite, we always make it very clear. There's 3 things that you have to know about training and using the ultrasound system. Number 1, knowing how to use the device. We called it knobology way back. Now it's a touch screen, no longer knobs, but still you have to know how to use the device. Number 2 is knowing the physiology, the anatomy, to get the images, to capture the right images to make the diagnosis. You have to know how to do that. Number 3 is knowing how to make a diagnosis. So there's different levels of trainings. I want to elaborate on 2 points with regards to number 3. Medical education is so important. It's a change we've been talking about a couple of days here with the panel members. A change that has to happen in today and in the future. The doctor of the future is the student of today. There's medical schools today that are being very active in instituting in their medical programs ultrasound training. From year 1 or year 2, University of California, Irvine, Ohio State University, University of South Carolina. This is very good. That's what's going to happen today so that the future doctor knows how to use the ultrasound system and scan. But then let's talk about something else. A technician, a medical technician, could be trained on simple protocols, whether they're in the ambulance or they're at Walgreens sometime in the future. For key particular protocols, these are the images you need to capture for these conditions. They can be trained on it, and that could be a success if you have another reading physician who knows how to read the ultrasound.
These are really great points. I'm going to push the panel a little bit further into an area that we talked a little bit about when we were preparing. And this is an area more that gets to the closed loop notion. So these are remote diagnostics, but the real goal would be to deliver an action step as soon as possible on that information. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the concepts that I've been learning in a partnership we just formed with Cisco at UCSF to build a large-scale interoperability platform. I'm learning about new technologies that are leveraged in other industries that I'm now calling informed industries as we try to move towards informed health, getting pertinent data at the moment of decision-making to optimize choices and outcome. In that, I'm learning about things such as edge analytics, so that these devices are not only capturing information that then gets transported back to some other level of interpretation, but some of that interpretation is actually happening out at the edge now. And with these capabilities of automated recognition, whether it's an image or a pattern or a text, and capabilities such as algorithmic or machine learning driven decision making, I'm wondering if you're in each of your sectors moving more towards that, and how are we going to define or understand the limits of that, the risk and responsibility that come along with that? Because ultimately, for the things that we can, we want to get more to closed loop processes. So I just thought it would be nice to hear from each of you on that concept.
Well, I can tell you from our perspective, we have machine learning developed algorithms running on smartphones, analyzing and telling a patient that their ECG rhythm is normal. We have studies ongoing that then take that one step further, that as soon as that comes back as normal or abnormal, it potentially engenders, with oversight by a physician, an immediate intervention, a pill in the pocket. If A, then B. And those are obviously under clinical trial, very, very strict notions, because medicines are not without problems. And so we're trying to implement that, but we're at the beginning of that. And everybody's worried about liability. That's the L word in medicine. As an orthopedic surgeon, you understand the concept. And we're worried about the patients. It's patients first. So ultimately, we believe that's going to be very important. We're just going to have to go through that sieve that we have in medicine that says you have to have this level of validation, this level of proof before people will accept it.
I think with the movement towards population health management at risk, this becomes a really important point, because it's the care navigation and getting that information quickly so that the patient can go to the lowest cost and the highest quality of care is really important. We're using some development on natural language based on the chief complaints digitally to make sure that through that interview of a number of questions from an intake perspective to determine what the right path of navigation is. We shouldn't be using technology in a virtual case if it's not appropriate. At the same time, if it's clearly defined that that patient should be going to a cardiologist, why are we moving them into the emergency department to sit there for 11 hours to wait to be told by an emergency medicine physician that they really need to be going into cardiology? So there's a lot of work that I think needs to be done about appropriately navigating those patients where they need to go.
I think that's really valuable. I'm thinking also along the lines of, as we're moving these technologies more into the hands of individuals, we also need to continue, not just the evidence side, but capturing their input, their feedback, and you raise a good point on that.
Yeah, and with imaging, unfortunately, it's not as easy as looking at data and making decisions. With imaging, now we're talking about optical recognition, we're talking about doing an auto-diagnosis. What we're talking about here is big data somewhere in the cloud. We're talking about Dr. Watson making a decision for you. But I can tell you, this is the holy grail. I can tell you so many startup companies, ultrasound imaging companies, are heading that direction. It's definitely the holy grail, competitive space. As a benefit, though, to having been acquired, Sonosite, by FUJIFILM a couple of years ago. FUJIFILM has a medical sector, does medical IT, a lot of technology in the FUJIFILM medical systems. So we're going to definitely be taking advantage of that. We're definitely going to be active into looking at how can we help the person who's doing the exam. They might be certified in making diagnoses in certain areas, but not others. But how can we help them initially? And yes, in the future, can that ultrasound system make the diagnosis by itself? That's a big question.
Well, we're getting near the end, but I wanted to give an opportunity for each panelist to throw out one more point that I might not have raised in my questions, and then I'll do a quick summary statement about that. But I think what we'll do at this point, just to mix it up a little bit, is I'll randomly pick you to start.
Cool. So I think that what we're talking about right now around the possibilities of how we can build a more efficient system within healthcare is one of the most important things that we can do. To be disruptors, we've seen disruption in just about every other industry. I think healthcare has lagged. I think a lot of it is due to certain things that from either a regulatory perspective that have to be rethought about the licensure and other things. But I think we're at a point where when we take a look at the next 3 years where people may not be able to think about the possibilities of doing this, they won't remember not being able to do this. Both the patient or the physician right now that's been pushing it back won't remember not being able to connect with their physician or their patient through device.
All right, David.
Well, you and I talked about before. You came up with the notion, we're supposed to be talking about the pocket-sized doctor's bag. And you said, when I told you, well, is that bag going to be a tricorder device in the home where the patient gathers the data, does their physical exam over a video link directed by a caregiver? And you said, so the question is really, who's going to be holding the bag? And that's really right. Physicians and paramedical personnel, nurse practitioners, nurses, med techs, they're going to be a whole variety of people performing aspects of the physical exam. And so I think that's going to present challenges, but it's all enabled by one thing that we haven't said, but is ubiquitous in this huge meeting: mobility. In our pockets, in our purses, is a globally connected supercomputer of just 15 years ago. And that is enabling not just Uber, but it's enabling this connectivity, this edge analytics, and I think it will enable a new definition for a doctor's bag.
Fantastic.
Yeah, as a final statement, change has to happen in a couple of ways. Technology is almost ready. I can say that there's several barriers still in terms of the payment expectation of when you use a device like an ultrasound system. When you're putting it in the pocket of the physician, you're no longer thinking about all the time about reimbursement if you're outside of the hospital, if you're in remote locations. You're thinking about reducing cost and improving outcomes for the patient. So the thinking in the future with the healthcare reform, it's no longer about the fee for service. Of course, in the future, it's about reducing cost. So that's a change that has to happen. Today, we're still in that mode, fee for service, reimbursement, absolutely. Then another technology change that has to happen, we talked about this too. The battery technology has not advanced for many years. We expect the battery power technology to change, to improve, so we can continue to make these devices more mobile, ultra mobile, in your pocket, last longer, and be able to do more for you and penetrate through the body if you're visualizing through the body. So a lot of things that we expect technology and the healthcare direction to adopt a couple of changes to help us get there.
Well, I really want to thank you, and I'm very inspired by the people I've spoken to on this panel for a couple of things. One is, of course, the capabilities of us now to understand more about the demands and responses of people in what I call their life flow. So outside of our artificial clinic setting where we do simple tests and then we try to predict how they're going to perform in their own homes and communities, we can now measure them in their life flow and also give feedback to individuals right away. But you can see that the groundbreaking technologies that we're doing to push these types of information gathering systems are still, even though they're breakthrough, they're being accompanied by responsibility, such as the scientific rigor and how will that information be used. And I think that's a very heartening message to get across. So we want to empower individuals. We want to have a sustainable healthcare system and a health and wellness system. And I think that these technologies are absolutely critical to making that happen.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Aenor.
Fantastic
Thank you.
session. Thank you. Thank you so much.